What's up everyone, Patrick here, welcome back. Moving on to the next question. We got to take this inequality, solve it without a calculator. So very similar to the previous example. Notice we have a mixture of decimals and fractions. So like I did in the previous example, I like to take any decimals, convert them to fractions first. So this 0.15, that's the same as what? 15 over 100. Which is the same, that simplifies to what? Divide both the numerator and denominator by 5. So 0.15 is the same as 3 over 20. So this I'm going to rewrite as 3 over 20x plus 1 over 12. That's going to be less than or equal to, now 0.4 is the same as 4 over 10, which is the same as 2 over 5. So this would be 2 over 5, 9x plus 4. Over 3, like that. And so from here, a bunch of different ways you can go about this. You can multiply everything by the lowest common denominator. If you want, this is like one expression here, so it would be all over 5. So you can multiply everything by 60. But let's get a little practice in with the fraction algebra. So I'm going to actually expand everything and keep everything as fractions. In the example before, we multiplied everything by lowest common denominator. In this one, I'm going to work with just fractions, do it a different way. But you can do it the other way as well. Just make sure you're getting the same answer at the end. So 2 over 5 times 9x gives us 18 over 5x. And then this would be 8 over 15, like that. So this I'm going to bring over. And then this I'm going to bring over. So we'll have 1 over 12 minus 8 over 15. And then we'll have 18 over 5x minus 3 over 20x. I try to always make sure when I'm dealing with inequalities that that value in front of the x, I've mentioned this in other videos, is going to be positive. So then when we get the x by itself, when we divide by that value, we don't have to worry about flipping the sign. So we could have brought this over here as well, the 18 over 5x, all the x values on the left side, then all the numbers to the right side. It's just when we would end up with a negative value in front of the x, so when we divide by a negative, we got to flip that sign, right? So don't forget about that. So from here, what I'll do is common denominator between these would be 60, 12 and 15, right? So this 12 goes into 60 5 times, multiplied by the top. So 5 over 60 is the same as 1 over 12. And then we can multiply this by 4, multiply the top by 4. So that would be 32 over 60, like that. And then from here, 20 would be the lowest common denominator between these. So I'll multiply this by 4, multiply this by 4. So we would have 72 over 20x minus 3 over 20x, like that. Right? So from here, this minus this would give us what? Negative 27 over 60, less than or equal to, this would end up being 69 over 20x, like that. And so continuing this up here, we would end up with what? Negative 27 over 60. Notice we can actually simplify that. This would simplify to negative 9 over 20. Right? We could divide this by 3 and then that by 3 as well. So negative 27 over 60 is the same as negative 9 over 20. And this would be 69 over 20x, like that. And so from here, what we can do, and sorry, this is not equals, this is an inequality still. From here, what we could do is, notice that the 20s would just cancel out, but let's just keep it with the fractions. Divide both sides by 69 over 20. So we would have x being greater than or equal to negative 9 over 20 divided by this fraction which would be like multiplying by the reciprocal of that. So the 20s would cancel out, and we'd end up with that. And then, so x has to be greater than or equal to negative 9 over 69. And then this here, that actually can simplify further. We can divide this by 3, divide that by 3. So we would end up having x is greater than or equal to negative 3 over 23, like that. So this here would end up being the answer. And if you tried to do this in decimals without a calculator, if you did it with a calculator, the negative 3 over 23, that's going to be like negative 0.13, and it's going to repeat if you notice. And so getting that value without a calculator would be impossible, right? So this is an example of if you did this without a calculator, you got to convert the decimals to fractions. It's not going to work the other way because this 4 over 3, the decimal for that is like 1.333 repeating. Right? So how are you going to work with that this whole time? So you would have to convert it to fractions. So whichever way you do it, that ends up being the final answer. And as you can see, just dealing with all the separate fractions, it's a lot more algebra than the other example. I would recommend, if I was doing this, at this step, I would just multiply this by 60, multiply this by 60, and multiply this by 60. So we'd end up with 9x plus 5, and then this 5 goes into 60. 12 times 2, we would have a 24 in front of this bracket. And then when we take the 24 multiplied by the 4 over 3, when we distribute it, that would end up giving us an integer. That would end up being, what, 32? And so we would then be working with no fractions, and we would still get that same solution. So whichever way you want to go about it, just make sure you're getting that final answer.